In the shadowy corridors of history, there exists a tale of tragedy, born from fear and nurtured by injustice, the Japanese-American internment. It was an era when the American dream turned into a nightmare, where the principles of liberty and equality faltered in the face of hysteria and paranoia. In the aftermath of the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, a nation gripped by fear sought a scapegoat, and in its panic, it turned on its own citizens. To understand the full gravity of the Japanese-American internment, one must delve into the historical context that led to its implementation. Japan's aggressive expansion in the Pacific during the 1930s heightened tensions with the United States, culminating in a series of economic sanctions and trade restrictions imposed by the US government. Diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between the two nations faltered, and on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The devastating assault resulted in the loss of thousands of lives and inflicted significant damage to the Pacific Fleet. The attack on Pearl Harbor shocked the American public and galvanized support for entry into World War II. Overnight, Japan became America's enemy, and suspicions of Japanese Americans as potential saboteurs or spies ran rampant. In the wake of the attack, fear and paranoia gripped the nation, fueled by sensationalized media reports and government propaganda. Japanese Americans, many of whom had lived in the United States for generations, suddenly found themselves viewed with suspicion and hostility. Amidst mounting pressure from politicians and military leaders, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. This executive order authorized the forced relocation and internment of Japanese Americans living on the West Coast, ostensibly to protect national security. The implementation of Executive Order 9066 was swift and draconian. Within weeks, Japanese American families were given just a few days to dispose of their possessions, abandon their homes, and report to assembly centers for processing. These assembly centers, hastily erected in fairgrounds and racetracks, were little more than temporary holding facilities where families were crowded into makeshift barracks and subjected to deplorable living conditions. From the assembly centers, Japanese Americans were transported to permanent internment camps located in remote and desolate regions of the country. Surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, these camps bore a striking resemblance to prisons, with armed guards patrolling the perimeter and strict regulations governing daily life. Families were assigned to cramped barracks with minimal privacy and inadequate sanitation facilities. Meals were often meager and of poor quality, and access to medical care was limited. Despite these harsh conditions, many Japanese Americans sought to maintain a sense of normalcy and dignity, establishing schools, churches, and recreational activities within the confines of the camps. The Japanese-American internment had far-reaching consequences that reverberated long after the camps were shuttered. Families were torn apart, livelihoods were destroyed, and communities were fractured. The psychological toll of internment lingered for generations, with many survivors suffering from trauma, stigma, and despite the injustices they faced, many Japanese Americans demonstrated remarkable resilience and courage in the face of adversity. Some volunteered to serve in the military, forming the segregated 442nd Regimental Combat Team and the 100th Infantry Battalion, which became the most decorated units in US military history. Decades later, the US government formally apologized for the internment and provided reparations to surviving internees. But the scars of this traumatic experience continue to shape the collective memory of Japanese-American communities. As we reflect on this tragic chapter in our nation's past, we must heed the lessons it teaches us about the fragility of democracy and the imperative to safeguard the rights and dignity of all individuals, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity. For the victims of the Japanese-American internment, the wounds may never heal fully. Thank you for joining us as we explored another pivotal moment in history. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that delves into the profound intersections of history, ethics, and science.